The galaxy had 26 species in its Interstellar Combat Institute, and 25 of them made perfect sense. Mantix warriors had exoskeletons that could deflect plasma rounds. Quillix soldiers regenerated limbs in under an hour. The Oxathi could see in 16 different spectrums and predict movement 3 seconds before it happened. Every species brought something to the table, some horrifying evolutionary advantage that explained why they'd survived long enough to develop spaceflight and join the galactic community. And then there were the humans. Liv stood in the observation area above Training Hall 12, watching her fellow cadets limber up for close-quarters combat drills. She was average height for her species, which meant she was dwarfed by about 80% of the beings around her. Her skin had no natural armor. Her teeth couldn't puncture hull plating. She didn't have venom sacs, redundant organs, or even a decent set of claws. What she did have was a stubborn streak that her instructors had described as medically concerning, and a genetic inheritance from a planet where everything, literally everything, had tried to kill her ancestors for millions of years. Not that the galaxy cared about that particular resume bullet point. You think they'll go easy on us today? Kip materialized beside her, his crystalline form refracting the overhead lights into rainbow patterns on the floor. His species communicated through vibrations, but he wore a translation collar that converted his frequencies into galactic standard. When has Uxmol ever gone easy on anyone? Liv kept her eyes on the training floor below, where the instructor in question was performing what looked like a warm-up routine, but would probably hospitalize most organic beings. Uxmol was Mantix, 8 feet of chitinous nightmare with 4 arms, compound eyes that missed nothing, and a reputation for breaking cadets like Kip broke light spectrums. Rumor had it he'd once fought off an entire boarding party with nothing but his lower set of arms, saving his upper limbs for the real threats. Point taken, Kip's voice hummed through the collar. I've been reviewing galactic combat statistics. Humans have the second worst win ratio in hand-to-hand drills. Who's first? The Plenari. But they're gaseous, so that's cheating. Liv snorted. The Plenari had tried physical combat exactly once before realizing their entire species was better suited for communication and diplomacy. Smart move. All cadets to the training floor. Uxmol's voice cut through the observation deck like a vibroblade through atmosphere. Today, we explore what happens when your weapons malfunction. Your armor fails, and all you have left is the body your evolution gave you. Kip flickered nervously, the crystalline equivalent of a gulp. Oh, good. My favorite kind of day. They descended to the main floor, joining the cluster of cadets that represented the galaxy's attempt at unified military training. Loqui was already there, her 6 amphibious arms stretching in directions that made Liv's spine hurt just watching. Phinox prowled nearby, his scaled quadrupedal form rippling with muscle that humans would need genetic engineering to replicate. Liv took her place in the formation, acutely aware that she looked like someone's pet in a lineup of apex predators. Pair drills are for species who need confidence. Uxmol clicked his mandibles together, the Mantix version of a smile, which was somehow worse than their fighting stance. You are beyond that now. Today, each of you faces me. The training hall went very, very quiet. One at a time. No weapons. Full contact. I will adjust my force level to match your species' durability. I'm not here to kill you, only to teach you what real combat feels like when everything goes wrong. Phinox shifted his weight, claws scraping the reinforced floor. Even he looked uncertain, and his species had evolved as pack hunters on a planet with triple Earth's gravity. Loqui, you're first. The amphibious cadet moved forward, her 6 arms adopting a defensive stance that her species had perfected over eons of aquatic combat. She was good. Liv had sparred with her before and spent most of the match being tied into knots by limbs coming from angles that shouldn't exist. Uxmal moved. 3 seconds later, Loqui was on the mat, all 6 arms pinned by Uxmal's 4, in a configuration that looked like abstract art, and structural engineering had a baby. "You telegraph with your 3rd left arm," Uxmal released her and offered a lower hand to help her up. "Fix that, or someone will remove it for you." Loqui bowed and retreated, rubbing her shoulders, all 6 of them. Phoenox. The scaled quadruped lasted 8 seconds, which was impressive until you realized Uxmal had used only 2 arms and hadn't even shifted his primary weight. Kip went next. His crystalline body could redirect force by changing his internal structure's density, a neat trick that had won him several matches against overconfident opponents. Uxmal adapted in real time, finding the resonant frequency that made Kip's form destabilize, then simply catching him before he shattered on the floor. Interesting defense mechanism, Uxmal set Kip down gently. Utterly useless against anyone who understands harmonics. One by one, cadets faced the instructor. One by one, they learned exactly how far they still had to go. Liv felt her heart rate climbing. Not panic. She'd trained herself out of panic in her first month here. After a particularly brutal session left her convinced she'd never survive to graduation. This was something else. Something that made her skin feel too tight and her vision narrow at the edges. Liv. Her name hung in the recycled air of the training hall. Around her, cadets shifted to get better viewing angles. She heard the soft clicking that meant someone was taking bets, probably on how many seconds she'd last before Uxmal had to catch her unconscious body. She stepped onto the mat. Up close, Uxmal was even more imposing. His compound eyes reflected her image back at her in dozens of tiny copies, all of them looking equally undersized and outmatched. Human physiology is fascinating. Uxmal's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. No natural weapons, no armor, relatively slow healing, average strength, average speed, average everything. He tilted his head, and she heard the whir of his neural processing. The galaxy wonders why your species was accepted into the Institute at all. Liv kept her mouth shut. She'd heard this speech before, in a dozen variations from a dozen different species. The subtext was always the same. What are you doing here, little mammal? This is a place for real warriors. Show me what you have, Uxmal said, dropping into a ready stance. Liv raised her hands, falling into the guard position she'd drilled 10,000 times. Human martial arts, adapted for zero-gravity combat, modified for opponents who might have anywhere from 2 to 8 limbs. It wouldn't be enough. She knew that. But she'd be damned if she went down without making him work for it. Uxmal moved, not his fastest speed, she could tell, but fast enough that her conscious mind barely registered the strike coming at her midsection. A controlled blow that would wind her, maybe crack a rib if she didn't move, but nothing that would cause permanent damage. Her body moved before her brain finished processing the visual input. Her left hand snapped up, deflecting the strike with a precision that surprised her. Her right hand was already countering, driving toward where Uxmal's thorax joint flexed. A vulnerable point she'd studied but never thought she'd be fast enough to exploit. Uxmal's second right arm blocked her counter, but his compound eyes widened fractionally. That was new. The next exchange happened faster. Uxmal increased his speed, still holding back, but less than before. Liv's body responded like it belonged to someone else. Her vision sharpened, Sounds became crystalline clear, and her muscles moved with an efficiency she'd never accessed in training. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a small voice was screaming, "What the hell is happening?" But it was getting drowned out by something older, something that had been waiting for precisely this moment. Around the training hall, monitoring equipment began to alarm. Liv caught Uxmol's third strike, redirected his fourth, and slipped under his fifth, with a movement that should have been impossible given her reaction time. Her hand found his lower left arm joint and applied pressure. Not enough to damage, but enough to disrupt his stance. Uxmol's mandibles clicked rapidly. Not anger, surprise. He increased speed again. So did she. The world became a series of snapshots. Uxmol's exoskeleton blurring through strike patterns, her hands moving to intercept, her feet finding positions she hadn't consciously chosen. Her heart rate spiked, then stabilized at a rhythm that felt both alien and intimately familiar. Her breathing changed. Shorter inhales, longer exhales, maximizing oxygen intake in a pattern she'd never trained. Her pupils dilated, then contracted in a sequence that had nothing to do with the light levels in the training hall. And somewhere deep in her cells, in the genetic code written by millions of years of survival on a planet that had spent every single day trying to kill her ancestors, something woke up. Uxmol struck high. Liv ducked, not because she decided to, but because her body had already mapped the trajectory and moved before her conscious mind finished processing the threat. She counterattacked low. Uxmol blocked, but she'd expected that. Her follow-up was already in motion, targeting the gap in his defensive pattern that existed for exactly 0.3 seconds between transitions. The galaxy's most decorated combat instructor took a half-step backward. The monitoring equipment was screaming now. Medical alerts flashed red across the observation deck displays. Somewhere, someone was running for the medbay. Liv didn't notice. She wasn't entirely Liv anymore. She was something older. Something that had outlasted ice ages and volcanic winters, that had stared down creatures with claws and fangs and venom, and decided, not today. She was the end product of a species that had survived by being too stubborn, too adaptable, and too relentlessly efficient at violence to die. Uxmol recognized it. She could see it in the way his stance shifted, the way his compound eyes tracked her movements with an intensity he'd shown none of the other cadets. He was no longer teaching. He was analyzing a potential threat. Fascinating, he clicked, and increased his speed to 70%. Liv matched him. The training hall had gone silent except for the sound of chitin on flesh, the scrape of feet on reinforced flooring, and the increasingly frantic beeping of medical monitors. Kip's translation collar was making sounds it had never made before, his entire crystalline structure vibrating at frequencies that indicated what other species might call extreme concern. Around the training hall, every cadet had stopped whatever post-drill stretching or wound-licking they'd been doing. All eyes, compound, multifaceted, thermal sensing, and otherwise, locked onto the human who was currently doing something the databank said was impossible. Liv's hands moved in patterns that blurred even to species with enhanced visual processing. Her body twisted through angles that should have torn ligaments, but her joints seemed to have discovered elasticity settings nobody knew humans possessed. More importantly, she was keeping pace with Uxmol at 70% capacity. Uxmol, who had once defeated a Quillix Berserker champion while giving a lecture on tactical positioning. Uxmol, who moved so fast that most species needed slow-motion replay to understand what had just hospitalized them. That Uxmol. "Her neural firing patterns are wrong!" someone was shouting from the observation deck, probably one of the medical staff. "Those synaptic speeds don't match human baselines." Liv heard the voice like it was coming from underwater, distant and irrelevant. Her focus had narrowed to a single point. Survive the next strike, counter the opening, adapt to the pattern. Her conscious thoughts had become passengers in a body that was operating on autopilot written by evolution itself. Uxmol's upper right arm snapped toward her throat. A killing blow if he'd meant it, but pulled to stop just short of contact. Liv's hand intercepted it anyway, wrapping around his chitinous wrist with grip strength that sent surprised clicks through his mandibles. She used his momentum to pivot, her other hand striking toward his mid-thorax with enough force that the impact echoed through the training hall. Uxmol absorbed the blow. His exoskeleton was built for worse, but his stance shifted defensively for the first time in the match. That's when everyone realized. The human wasn't losing anymore. She wasn't winning either, but she also wasn't supposed to still be standing. Medical team to Training Hall 12. The announcement cut through the facility-wide comm system. Possible neurological event in progress. Phinox's tail lashed nervously. What's happening to her? Nothing good, Loqui's voice rippled through all 6 of her vocal chambers. Her biometrics are... I don't even know what those readings mean. Uxmol increased to 80%. Liv's pupils dilated again, then contracted to pinpoints, then dilated once more in a rhythmic pattern that had nothing to do with light adaptation and everything to do with threat assessment, happening faster than conscious thought could manage. Her heart rate spiked to 190, held there for 5 seconds, then dropped to 68. The kind of cardiovascular control that took monks decades to master. She'd learned it in 30 seconds of combat. Her breathing shifted again. 3 short inhales through her nose, 1 long exhale through her mouth, cycling oxygen through her system with mechanical efficiency. Her muscles weren't burning with lactic acid buildup. Her reaction time wasn't degrading with fatigue. If anything, she was getting faster. The training hall doors burst open. Dr. Imco rushed in, medical scanner in hand, and his face displaying what humans might call professional alarm. His species, the Polixani, had 3 eyes arranged in a triangle formation and skin that shifted colors with emotional state. Right now, he was cycling through orange, red, and a purple that indicated extreme confusion. "Stop the match!" Imco's voice cracked across the hall. "Her neurochemistry is undergoing cascade failure, or cascade something. I don't have baseline comparisons for what I'm seeing." Uxmol either didn't hear or didn't care. His compound eyes were locked onto Liv, with an intensity that made several cadets take involuntary steps backward. He'd seen something, recognized something, and now he needed to understand it. He pushed to 85%. Liv's response was immediate. Her left hand blocked a strike that should have broken bones. Her right countered toward a vulnerable joint, and her knee drove upward in a follow-through that Uxmol barely deflected. The movements flowed together without pause, without thought, without any of the hesitation that marked conscious decision-making. She wasn't fighting anymore. She was happening. By the void, Kip's translation collar barely managed to convert his frequencies. She's not even blinking. He was right. Liv's eyes had fixed into a predator's stare, unblinking, tracking Uxmol's center mass with mechanical precision. Her face had gone slack, emotionless, all higher cognitive function redirected to the single task of not dying in the next 3 seconds. This was the reflex the galaxy had never documented. Not because it was secret, not because humanity had hidden it, but because modern human civilization had spent the last few thousand years making absolutely sure their species never needed to access it. Cities had walls. Laws prevented violence. Technology eliminated most survival threats. Humans lived their entire lives without ever triggering the ancient protocol buried in their genetic code. The one that said when conscious thought is too slow and death is too close, switch to manual override. Let the body drive. Let millions of years of successful predation and successful survival take the wheel. Become the thing that outlasted everything else on a planet that spent every day trying to kill you. Uxmal struck with all four arms simultaneously, a pattern designed to overwhelm any opponent's ability to track multiple threats. Liv's body processed the incoming vectors, calculated optimal response, and executed a counter-pattern that intercepted 3 strikes and evaded the 4th by millimeters. Her follow-up attack targeted the gap between Uxmal's upper and lower arm pairs, the split-second window where his defense pattern had to reset. She was learning his fighting style in real time. No, not learning. Her body was downloading it directly into muscle memory, bypassing the slow process of conscious analysis. Enough! Uxmal's voice cut through the training hall with command authority that made every cadet snap to attention instinctively. He dropped his stance, all 4 arms raising in the universal gesture for cessation of hostilities. Liv didn't stop. Her body was still locked in threat response mode, still operating under the assumption that stopping meant dying. Her hand was already moving toward Uxmal's lowered guard, targeting the vulnerable joint at his neck. Uxmal caught her wrist, gently but firmly, with one of his lower arms while his upper arms maintained defensive position. Cadet, the match has ended. Liv's arm strained. Against his grip, muscles corded with tension that shouldn't exist in a species classified as moderate strength baseline. Her eyes were still predator blank, still not blinking, still not home. Liv! Kip's voice rang out, and something in the familiar frequency pattern penetrated the combat trance. Liv, it's over! You're safe! Her pupils flickered. Consciousness began returning to a body that had been running on autopilot for the last 3 minutes. 3 minutes that had rewritten the galaxy's understanding of human physiology. Her legs gave out. Uxmal caught her before she hit the floor, his movements surprisingly gentle for someone who'd been striking at 85% capacity moments before. He lowered her carefully to the mat, mandibles clicking in a pattern that his species used for respect toward worthy opponents. Medical team, now! Imco was already beside them, scanner flashing through diagnostic sequences that painted the air with holographic readouts. Liv's eyes rolled back. Her body went limp, not unconscious exactly, but shut down, every system that had been pushed beyond normal parameters suddenly sending urgent requests for rest, hydration, and about 16 hours of sleep. Her heart rate was dropping back to normal. Her breathing steadied into regular patterns. Her pupils returned to responding to light levels like they were supposed to. But the monitoring equipment had recorded everything. Every impossible reaction time. Every superhuman burst of processing speed. Every moment where a human cadet had matched pace with one of the galaxy's most dangerous warriors, using nothing but the body evolution had given her. In the observation deck, someone was already copying the data files. In the training hall, cadets whispered in 24 languages, all asking the same question. On the mat, Liv's last conscious thought, before neural exhaustion dragged her under, was a simple one. What the hell just happened to me? The medical bay of Kepri 9 station smelled like sterilization chemicals, and the particular kind of anxiety that came from treating species whose biology you'd only read about in textbooks. Liv woke up on an examination platform that had been hastily reconfigured for human proportions, surrounded by monitoring equipment that beeped in a discordant symphony of concern. Dr. Imco's middle eye focused on her, while his other two scanned readouts that floated in holographic displays around her bed. His skin had settled into a nervous green-yellow combination. "How are you feeling?" His voice carried the careful neutrality of someone who'd spent years delivering bad news to species that might respond by exploding, turning to stone, or phasing into alternate dimensions. Liv's mouth felt like she'd been chewing sand. Her muscles ached in places she didn't know could ache. "Like I got hit by a cargo transport. What happened?" "That's what I'm trying to determine." Imco gestured to the displays with 3 of his 6 fingers. "Your neural activity during that match was unprecedented. Your synaptic firing rates exceeded documented human capabilities by 43%. Your reaction times were processing information faster than your conscious brain could register stimuli." "That's not possible." Liv tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as her abdominal muscles filed a formal complaint. "I watched the recordings 6 times." Imco's skin flickered orange, fascination overtaking nervousness. "You blocked strikes before Uxmol completed the motion. Your body was predicting attack vectors and responding to threats that hadn't fully materialized yet." Liv's brain felt like it was grinding through thick mud. She remembered the match in fragments, Uxmol's chitinous arms blurring toward her, her hands moving without conscious input, the strange sensation of being a passenger in her own body. "I wasn't thinking," she said slowly. "I mean, I was there, but I wasn't driving. Something else was." Imco's 3 eyes locked onto her with unsettling intensity. "Describe it." "It felt like—" Liv struggled for words. "Like my brain shut off the part that questions and hesitates and worries about consequences. Everything became simple. Threat detected, threat neutralized, assess next threat. Like a program running on loop." "A program." Imco's fingers danced across holographic controls, pulling up genetic sequences that looked like abstract art. "Your endocrine system flooded your bloodstream with a neurochemical cocktail that shouldn't exist in that combination. Adrenaline, yes, but also compounds we don't have names for. Your hypothalamus activated pathways that aren't in any human medical database. So I'm broken? Or extremely functional, depending on perspective." Imco zoomed in on a section of genetic code. "I contacted the Human Medical Collective on Earth. Sent them your readings. They've been analyzing for the past 6 hours." 6 hours? Liv glanced at the chronometer. She'd been unconscious for nearly half a rotation. "What did they say?" "They said, and I'm translating their rather excited scientific terminology here, that you activated something they've theorized about but never actually documented in living subjects." The medical bay doors slid open. Uxmol ducked through. The doorways on Kepri 9 were built for species diversity, but Mantix warriors still had to mind their heads, followed by Kip, who was vibrating with what Liv had learned to recognize as his version of concern. "She's awake," Kip's translation caller announced unnecessarily. "Are you okay? You looked dead. Very dead. Distressingly dead." "Thanks for the vivid description." Liv managed a weak smile. "I'm fine. Apparently I just discovered I'm a medical anomaly." "You're more than that." Uxmol moved to the foot of her bed, compound eyes reflecting her image in dozens of tiny copies. "Your evidence." "Evidence of what?" "That humanity has been catastrophically underestimated." Uxmol's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. "In 300 years of galactic military cooperation, humans have been classified as support specialists, communications, medical personnel, technical operations. Everyone assumed your species lacked the physical capabilities for frontline combat. We do lack them. Liv gestured at her completely non-armored body. I don't have claws or venom or... You have something better. Uxmol interrupted, which was unusual enough that both Imco and Kip's translation collar registered surprise. You have adaptability. When your conscious mind becomes a liability, your body has a backup system that takes control. That sounds terrifying. It is. Uxmol's tone carried something that might have been respect. I've fought in 68 campaigns across 19 star systems. I've faced berserkers, hive minds, and species genetically engineered for combat. None of them frightened me as much as watching you stop thinking and start operating. Liv processed that. Coming from a warrior who'd once used a broken limb as a weapon to finish a fight, it meant something. The Human Medical Collective has a theory, Imco interrupted, pulling up more data. Your species evolved as persistence hunters. You couldn't outrun prey, couldn't overpower them, but you could outlast them. Chase them until they collapsed from exhaustion. This required conscious thought, tracking, planning, endurance management. I know the evolutionary history, Liv said. We learned it in basic xenobiology. Humans traded raw physical power for big brains and endurance. But that's not the whole story. Imco's skin shifted to deep purple. Excitement. Your ancestors also needed a survival mechanism for when they became the prey instead of the predator. When something bigger and faster and more dangerous decided to make them dinner. Conscious thought is wonderful for planning and tool use. But it's too slow when death is measured in seconds. The pieces started connecting in Liv's exhausted brain. So, we developed a shutdown protocol. An override system, Imco corrected. Your higher cognitive functions don't disappear. They're redirected. Your pattern recognition, your threat assessment, your spatial reasoning, all of it gets repurposed into a single task. Survive the next 3 seconds. Then the next 3. Then the next. Your body becomes an autonomous defense platform, Uxmol added. And because human physiology is already optimized for endurance and efficiency, that autonomous system can operate for extended periods without degradation. Kip's vibrations took on a nervous frequency. How extended? Imco pulled up another chart. Based on the neurochemical levels and energy consumption rates? Theoretically, hours. Maybe longer if the threat persisted. The medical bay went quiet, except for the beeping of monitors. Hours, Liv repeated. Of me not being in control of my own body. Of your body protecting you more, effectively, than your conscious mind could, Imco said gently. Every species has survival mechanisms. Quilix regenerate. Mantics have armor. Polyxene can hibernate for years. Humans apparently have the ability to become self-operating combat units. Does every human have this? Kip asked the question Liv was too afraid to voice. We tested the other human personnel on station while you were unconscious. Imco pulled up files. 4 other humans. Different genetic backgrounds, different fitness levels, different training. All of them have the same dormant neural pathways. All of them carry the genetic markers for this response system. Liv felt like the medical platform was tilting. You're telling me every human can do what I did? Potentially. With the right trigger. Imco's eyes showed sympathy. Modern Earth civilization hasn't faced existential survival threats for millennia. Most humans live entire lives without ever experiencing true life or death situations. The reflex stays dormant because it's never needed. Until a human joins military training and faces a Mantix instructor in full-contact combat. Uxmol's mandibles clicked, in what might have been amusement. Then evolution remembers. The medical bay doors opened again. This time, the figure who entered made Kip shift nervously, and Uxmal straighten to full attention. Mulketh swept in on wings that caught the sterile lighting and threw it back in iridescent patterns. His species, the Voktari, resembled birds if birds had been engineered by committee to look maximally impressive. He held a position on the Interstellar Combat Institute's Oversight Council, which meant he had opinions about everything and the authority to make everyone listen. "I've reviewed the incident report." Mulketh's voice had the clipped precision of someone who'd learned Galactic Standard from a grammar algorithm. "This is clearly a case of genetic modification. Humans have enhanced their species beyond natural parameters and neglected to file proper disclosure documentation." "That's not," Liv started. "I've examined her genetic sequence personally," Imco interrupted, his skin flashing red. Anger. "No modifications, no enhancements. This is baseline human biology responding to stimulus." "Impossible." Mulketh's feathers ruffled. "Baseline humans are classified as non-combat species, suitable for support roles only." "Your classification was wrong." Uxmal's voice carried enough authority that even Mulketh paused. "I fought this cadet. She matched my pace at 85% capacity using reflexes her species evolved naturally. There's no technology involved, no genetic tampering, just a very old, very efficient survival mechanism that nobody bothered to test for." "If this is true..." Mulketh's wings folded tightly against his body, a Voktari stress response. "If humans possess this capability naturally, then the entire combat classification system needs revision. Do you understand the implications? Humanity has 56 colonies and outposts across 12 sectors. Millions of individuals who could potentially defend themselves more effectively than we gave them credit for," Uxmal finished. "Yes, I understand the implications perfectly." The tension in the medical bay could have been cut with a plasma blade. "We need to suppress this information," Mulketh decided, "until proper analysis can be completed. The last thing we need is panic about humans being some kind of sleeper combat species." Too late. Kip's translation collar made an apologetic chirping sound. "The training hall recordings have already circulated through cadet networks. 17 species have filed requests for information. The Quilix military attaché specifically wants to know if humans can be classified as potential peer threats." Mulketh's feathers stood completely on end. "This is a disaster. This is reality." Liv surprised herself by speaking up. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't know I could do this. But it happened. And now everyone knows humans aren't quite as harmless as the databanks suggested." "Harmless?" Uxmal's mandibles clicked rapidly. Mantic's laughter. "Your species spent millions of years perfecting the art of not dying on a planet that tried very hard to make you extinct. You outlasted ice ages, predators, diseases, and each other. Now the galaxy discovers you have a biological panic button that turns you into autonomous combat units." He looked directly at Mulketh. "Personally, I find it refreshing. Most species' survival mechanisms are straightforward. Humans decided to get creative." Mulketh looked like he wanted to argue but couldn't find solid ground to stand on. Finally, he ruffled his wings and turned toward the door. "This conversation isn't over. The council will convene to discuss appropriate responses." After he left, the medical bay felt significantly less tense. "He's scared," Kip observed. "He should be," Uxmal said quietly, looking at Liv. "The galaxy just learned that the species it dismissed as soft and weak carries weapons nobody can see until they activate." That's the kind of revelation that changes politics. Liv lay back on the medical platform, exhausted and overwhelmed. Somewhere in her genetic code, written by millions of years of survival, was a combat protocol that could turn her into something that frightened veteran warriors. She wasn't sure how she felt about that. The Interstellar Combat Institute had seen its share of incidents: species conflicts over dietary requirements, training accidents involving incompatible biologies. That memorable week when a Quillix cadet's regeneration went haywire and they'd spent 3 days chasing ambulatory limbs through the ventilation system. But this was different. Liv returned to active duty rotation 5 days after the match, and the atmosphere in Training Hall 12 had fundamentally shifted. Cadets, who'd previously ignored her now, tracked her movements with wary attention. Phinox gave her twice the usual space during sparring exercises. Even Loqui, who had been friendly in that casual military way, approached conversations with new caution. Only Kip remained his usual crystalline self, though his translation collar kept making nervous clicking sounds whenever combat drills were announced. "You're a celebrity," he informed her while they waited for morning briefing. "There are discussion forums on 17 different networks, analyzing your match frame by frame. Someone made a compilation of the moments where you moved faster than Uxmol expected. It has 3 million views. That's horrifying. That's politics." Kip's internal structure refracted light in an apologetic pattern. The Quillix delegation formally requested clarification on whether humans should be reclassified as potential military threats. The Polixani Science Council wants to study your species' neural architecture. And the Vokatari, let me guess, Mulketh is still having feather failure over the whole thing. He proposed mandatory genetic screening for all human personnel to identify which individuals carry elevated markers for the combat reflex. Kip paused. The human collective told him where he could file that proposal. The translation was diplomatic, but the intent wasn't. Liv had received the message from Earth herself. A terse communique from the Human Medical Collective explaining that yes, all humans possess the dormant reflex pathway, and no, they would not be participating in any screening programs that treated their species' natural biology as a threat. The subtext was clear. The galaxy had underestimated humanity. That was the galaxy's problem to solve. All cadets, attention. Uxmol entered the training hall, his compound eyes sweeping across the assembled species. Today's exercise involves threat assessment and controlled response. You'll face multiple opponents in sequence with escalating difficulty. The usual groans rippled through the cadet formation. Liv, your demonstration partner. The groans stopped. Every eye in the hall focused on her. Liv stepped forward, hyper-aware of the attention. Her body felt normal. No signs of the autonomous combat mode that had taken over during the last match. Her heart rate was elevated but manageable. Her thoughts were clear and present. She was just Liv. Not an autonomous defense platform. Not a weapons system nobody could see until it activated. Just a human who was really tired of being the center of galactic controversy. Uxmol regarded her with those multifaceted eyes that missed nothing. "How are you feeling?" "Like everyone's waiting for me to turn into something terrifying." "You already are something terrifying. The question is whether you control it, or it controls you." He dropped into ready stance. "Defend yourself." The strike came fast, not 85%, maybe 60, targeting her shoulder. Liv's body tensed, ready to slip into that other state where conscious thought stepped aside and survival instinct took the wheel. She felt it hovering at the edges of her awareness, waiting for permission to flood her system with neurochemicals and override protocols. She didn't let it. Instead, she blocked using technique she'd drilled consciously. Her movement was slower than during the previous match, human normal speed, relying on training rather than evolutionary autopilot. Yeximol's second strike came, and she deflected it with form that would earn passing marks but wouldn't rewrite any combat databases. She was present, conscious, choosing each response rather than letting ancient programming choose for her. Yeximol increased intensity slightly. Liv adapted, staying in control, riding the edge between panic and performance. Her heart rate climbed but didn't spike into that dangerous cascade that preceded the reflex activation. After 30 seconds, Yeximol stopped and stepped back. Better. His mandibles clicked approvingly. You're learning the most important lesson. Which is? Power without control is just chaos waiting to happen. But control without access to power makes you predictable. He gestured toward the watching cadets. Every species here has advantages. Phinox has natural weapons. Loqui has 6 arms. Kip can manipulate his density. They train to use those advantages effectively, not to pretend they don't exist. So I should just accept that I have a combat reflex that turns me into something that scares veteran warriors? You should accept that you have a tool. Whether that tool defines you is your choice. Yeximol's voice carried across the training hall, addressing everyone. I fought in the border wars, watched species tear each other apart over territory and resources. You know what the most dangerous combatants had in common? Not the biggest claws or the thickest armor. The most dangerous ones were those who knew exactly what they were capable of and chose precisely when to use it. Liv felt the weight of dozens of eyes on her, species that could see in spectrums she couldn't perceive, that possessed advantages she'd never match, all waiting to understand what this revelation about humanity meant. Your species hid weapons nobody knew about, Yeximol continued. Not through deception, but through circumstance. Modern civilization never required you to access your full capabilities. Now, the galaxy knows. The question is, what happens next? The Council wants restrictions, someone called out, one of the Voktari cadets, speaking up for the first time. Monitoring protocols for human personnel. The Council fears what it doesn't understand. Yeximol clicked dismissively. Fear makes politicians propose stupid solutions. But we're not politicians. We're warriors in training. So here's what happens next in this facility. Liv trains like everyone else. She learns to access her advantages when appropriate and maintain control when necessary. Just like the rest of you. Phinox's tail twitched. What if she loses control? What if the reflex activates and she can't stop it? Then I'll stop her, Yeximol said simply. The same way I'd stop Loqui if her grappling technique went too far, or Kip if his density shifts became dangerous. Training exists to prepare you for real combat, which means learning your limits before someone else finds them for you. The tension in the training hall shifted. Not gone, but transformed into something more manageable. Pair drills, Yeximol announced. Standard rotation. Liv, you're with Kip. Try not to break him. Crystalline structures are expensive to repair. Kip's translation collar made a sound like a sigh. Why is it always me? The training session continued, and slowly, carefully, the atmosphere returned to something approaching normal. Cadets sparred and drilled and made the usual mistakes that came from working with bodies designed by different evolutionary pressures. Liv worked through exercises with Kip, conscious of keeping her movements controlled and deliberate. The combat reflex was still there. She could feel it like pressure behind her eyes, ready to activate if genuine threat materialized. But she kept it leashed, proving to herself and everyone watching that she was more than just an autonomous defense system. After the session ended, Uxmol called her aside. "You did well today," he said quietly. "Resisting the reflex when it wanted to activate takes discipline most species never develop. I was terrified of losing control again." "Good. Fear of your own power is healthy. It's overconfidence that gets people killed." His mandibles clicked thoughtfully. "The galaxy is going to watch humanity more carefully now. Some species will fear you. Others will want to study you. Many will simply adjust their threat assessments and move forward." "And the Institute?" "The Institute trains warriors. Whether you're mantics with natural armor or human with emergency combat protocols doesn't change the fundamental mission." Uxmol's compound eyes reflected her tired face back at her. "You proved that humans belong here, not because you're harmless, but because you're capable. The galaxy will adapt." Liv nodded, exhaustion settling into her bones. Not the neural exhaustion from the combat reflex activating, but the regular tiredness that came from pushing physical and mental limits through training. She left the training hall aware of the looks that followed her. No longer dismissive, no longer seeing the soft mammal who didn't belong. Now they saw what she'd always been, a human, carrying the inheritance of millions of years spent outlasting everything that tried to end her species. The galaxy had learned its lesson. Never underestimate a species that survived by being too stubborn to die. Because when you corner a human, when you push them past conscious thought into that ancient place where only survival matters, you're not fighting the person in front of you anymore. You're fighting every ancestor who refused to quit, every generation that adapted and persisted, every impossible victory written into genetic code by sheer relentless refusal to become extinct. And that, as Uxmol had recognized immediately, was the most dangerous weapon of all, the one you carried in your cells and couldn't see until circumstances forced it awake. Liv walked back to her quarters, still herself, still in control. But now, finally, she understood what she was capable of becoming when control stopped being an option. 3 months later, the Interstellar Combat Institute published revised combat classification guidelines. Humans were upgraded from support specialist, non-combat primary, to adaptive combatant, threat assessment required. Mulketh complained formally. The Quilix military attaché requested joint training exercises. The Polixani Science Council published 6 papers on human neurochemistry, each more excited than the last. Liv made it through advanced combat certification with marks that surprised nobody anymore. She learned to dance with the reflex instead of fighting it, letting it surface when necessary, keeping it controlled when possible. Some days were harder than others. Some training sessions pushed her into that autonomous state where her body operated on ancient programming. But she always came back. Kip graduated alongside her, his crystalline structure having survived their partnership despite his ongoing concerns about fragility. Finnox admitted, during the final celebration, that sparring with Liv had made him better, forced him to stop relying solely on natural advantages and actually think tactically. Even Uxmol offered rare praise. "You've become what every warrior should be," he told her at the graduation ceremony. "Dangerous when necessary, controlled when possible, aware of what you carry." Liv accepted her certification with hands that had learned to block strikes faster than conscious thought. The galaxy watched, wary, curious, respectful, as humanity took its place among species that had always known their advantages. Nobody called humans harmless anymore. Nobody made jokes about soft mammals playing at warrior training. Because the galaxy had learned what Earth's evolutionary pressure cooker had known for millions of years. The most dangerous predator isn't always the one with the biggest claws. Sometimes it's the one who simply refuses to die, who carries backup systems written in genetic code, who can become other when survival demands it. Sometimes it's the human who smiled politely, while her cells remembered every impossible victory her species had ever earned.